Morning, everyone. I'm just sending out a notice on MailChimp, so I will be a moment. If you need to get a cup of coffee, now would be a good time to do it. And I will be right back with you. Morning, Jordan.
Morning.
I'm just working up on sending out a notice here,
Cool.
which I'll get done here momentarily. You're welcome to talk about the state of the world or anything else.
Well, Zoom didn't want to let me in.
Zoom didn't want to let you in?
Yeah, maybe I may have been hitting the password. Is it hidden? But I went really slow the last time and it worked. So,
Okay. So we are we on part 2 or part 3 of this?
we're on,
Did we do it last 2 weeks or 1 week?
we're on the return of the sacred and
Yeah, I guess it's 1 week. Yeah, so
Yeah,
this is part 2.
and we stopped right after their evil expresses the darkness that is built up in the soul.
Yeah. Righto. So this will take only a moment.
Which is interesting to me because the terrorism kind of feel it feels like feudal times sticking around now. It
Yeah,
doesn't feel present.
I know the feeling.
It feels, I don't know, I don't want to psychologize it too much, but it feels like angsty teenager who had shitty parents, and
Okay. Yep.
everyone's parents are not the best, so they're
Well,
people, so they did the best they could.
now that's my problem. Okay. Great. Getting close here.
Cool.
Sorry, this has got attenuated. I have a big observation this coming week. And so,
Observation to make, or more like a test?
huh?
Observation to make, or like a test
Yeah.
observation?
Yeah, I'm not exactly sure what the objective is because the principal came in and asked me to do this. And I said, well, okay, if I have to. Um, but, the fact is that uh, I already did formal uh, a formal observation. Just a minute. Okay, command. Problem is I use Microsoft machine at school and a Mac at home, preferably. And so the commands are opposite. Okay. So anyway, the principal comes in and says, we want you to do this observation in my worst class, which is our 8th grade math class. And yeah, and these kids are just out of control.
Yeah.
And so it's just a real trial to even keep them just send this.
I'll refill while you can do that. I can still hear.
Yeah. Okay. All right. 1 minute to go, folks. And getting the notice out. Okay. So we are here, and sorry to keep you waiting. We are doing this Return of the Sacred in the Time of Terror, Part 2. And good morning, Sheree. Morning, Brandy. Nice to see you. Okay, sorry that took longer than I wanted it to. And let me get my, okay, here we go. Get my screen set up here so I can find things in the usual way. Okay. All right. I very much apologize to our friends who've been waiting here for about 5 minutes, but I had to get the notice out, even though we don't have too many people coming to this session. I'm sorry for that. I mean, not in the chat, but in in the live broadcast from us. Let me okay, I'm going to put in the link how you can sign up to get notices to come on with us and speak with us directly. And I'm going to do that now. Good morning, Art. Nice to see you today. Let's see. Didn't work. Just a minute. Computers are my favorite expletive. Yeah.
It's two four-letter words. Like
It's
actually two
it's two
four-letter
for
words with a U in the middle. With a U in the middle.
yeah. Okay, let's see if I can get it done this time. It's not working at the moment. Okay, try again.
It's interesting, this whole Lacanian perspective. I just looked it up because curious in a bigger picture what his gig was. Lacanian perspectives contend that the human mind is structured by the world of language, known as the symbolic. They stress the importance of desire, which is conceived of as perpetual and impossible to satisfy. Seems to be shame-based guilt in an antithesis to Stoicism. don't know, all these structural, post-structural, modern, postmodern. I find they're too concerned with meaning. And
Right.
the word modernism, where that started, is the most boring historical title ever. I mean, Michelangelo was modern when he was young, when he started.
Yeah.
It it seems like way too many adjectives and not enough verbs, frankly. It's a lot of talk and not a lot of action.
Uh,
I'm kind of
okay.
metaphor and anti-poetry and anti-adjective these days just for simplicity's sake, but
I think we're
oh, we
getting
have someone.
somebody aboard here, but um, yes.
Welcome, Frederic.
Hello from France.
All right. I hope I did it that time. I'm not going to waste any more time trying to get this uh, connection up. Um, Everybody should have it from previous emails that I've sent out over time. And you should be able to join us. Okay.
Thanks for coming, Frederic.
Hello, thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Perfect.
Okay, I've messed it up, so I guess we just have to proceed. Because I don't seem to be able to get. Let's see. One more time with feeling. Well, okay, I don't know. Somehow my computer's not cooperating with me today. I apologize for that. Okay, so we're going to be talking about postmodernism, and that is the time we are regretfully living through now. And that's because modernism was when the Enlightenment happened, and everybody figured a lot of stuff out really fast, back starting around 1521 or something like that, when Tycho Brahe started to talk about the universe, and then others came along. And everything got fairly rigid. I mean, we had national boundaries. Everybody knew what the religions were. We knew that church was that religion and that church was that religion. And we knew what your gender was, and everything was clear as it could be. And we had a big war, World War II, that sort of broke a lot of things down. And subsequent to World War II, we've sort of expanded out into the universe. So everybody's, like the movie says, everything everywhere all at once. So when I was in high school living in Japan, I had never got to speak to my grandparents on the telephone for 2.5 years that I was over there the first time. And nowadays, I think nothing of picking up my phone and calling um, colleagues wherever on the other side of the planet all the time. And now everybody can do that if they just learn a little bit of stuff. And so the result is that everything's getting mixed together, and getting infused with other attitudes. We have Catholic Buddhists, we have Jewish Buddhists, you name it. lots of different perspectives on the world. And so that's basically what we're talking about here. Any anything else you wanted to add, Jordan, before I begin? Oh, I'm not hearing you, sir.
I think architecture, especially 20th century modern architecture, start with Adolf Loos and Bauhaus. They basically just stripped form of shape other than circle and square, and stripped decoration and detail, made decoration sound superficial and shameful. And I think really all they did was get back to, first year drafting course.
Yeah,
with
basically.
Concrete. And cool, great, you're learning, but we don't need to learn, a whole methodology in public. Go keep that to the school. So I think what's interesting is basically the white boxes, the international style modernism from 1917 to 1940 kind of thing. They overgeneralized identity. They oversimplified everything. And I think what's interesting is that strips things down to a very adolescent, still learning to walk in a professional capacity level. And I think we sit here today and we get so much us and them all the time. That's very adolescent, nihilistic, angsty. And I think that I don't really encounter those people much anymore because I don't listen to them. They keep them moving on, and they can learn on their own time. At the same time, having a sense of empathy that, well, that's where they are. And so personally, my strip it down to the details modernism is when I have the urge to judge, first I judge the urge. What about me is getting irritated because it's not them.
Well, we've given up something as human beings, it seems to me. We've really given up culture, and we've given it up in honor of profit, I think. So with architecture, it's very easy to see when the change happened on major university campuses. Okay, because you go to my college, Hamilton College, or any major university, and before the 20th century, you see buildings that are beautifully put together, and they are beautiful. They have lots of art in them. They incorporate art into the cathedrals, what have you. And then in the 20th century, we said, okay, we don't need the artists anymore. We can build a cathedral that has no soul, basically, and it'll be a lot cheaper than having all these sculptors come in and do stuff. And so we started doing that, and so you can go to almost any university campus today and see where the change took place. Likewise in religion, you have to go to Europe or Washington's National Cathedral to see the old style, but the new style is these glass cathedrals, or aluminum and glass cathedrals that also have no soul or very little. And and so we've given up something in the name of profit and saving money.
Well, and then the word efficiency instead of effective, because effective includes quality. Efficiency just means speed. And well, there's an implication there that you can pull apart. But I think all this is kind of the predecessor to the IKEA mentality, where not some assembly required, it's all prefabricated, all assembly required.
Yeah.
And I think the precursor was the Butler building, which is just steel stud walls and
Oh, yeah.
bar joist trusses and a flat roof where it arrives on a flatbed semi trailer and you pull it apart and A through Z, put it together, and there's really only foundation, wall, roof. It's just like it's repetitive. The wall is all one thing, and there are no ins and outs. And if they are, they're remodeled on with smaller Butler buildings. I mean, or bigger or different. And I think the whole prefabrication, comes out of the industrial revolution.
Yeah, we even prefabricate stained glass windows. For example, in Vietnam, we did have a chapel in our combat base, and it was built out of sandbags. It was a bunker, but there were windows in this bunker that could be filled in with sandbags if need be. But the chaplain came with a piece of plastic that was painted like a stained glass window, and he would just put this up over this hole in the bunker, and there we go. Now we have a church.
Well, that exactly. And then if I apply this to the current state of the U.S. educational system, all the standardized testing since HROS Perot, and honestly, since Carter started the Department of Education, we were number one back then, number two, number three, like 29. So all these standardized tests, they don't teach people things other than indoctrination and how to dumb things down. So too much efficiency is not effective, because I think you don't even have QC anymore. The quality control is just, can you spit back rote stuff that I gave you?
Yeah.
But the art and the creativity and the imagination is unknown to some people.
Right.
I mean, that inner city kids who, you eat a carrot straight from the ground and they say, "Oh, it's dirty." It's like, where do you think carrots come from? Well, they come from the back of the store in cardboard boxes. My brother stocks them. I'm like, wow. Right. They have never seen nature, green, tree, stream, river, fish, out of, actually in the wild. So I kind of got on the bandwagon to oversimplify and say, well, it's too much efficiency and not enough effectiveness.
Yeah, it's something like that.
And the Lacanian piece where he says, bringing back the rise of religion, but without a resistance to evil. So there's the holier than now self-righteous religious piece, rather than, which is basically just a giant cultural avoidance.
Yeah. Well, but there's a counterpoint here, which when I went to Japan, before I went in my interview, I was asked, do you think of yourself as more effective or more efficient? And I said more effective. And apparently that was the right answer because I got the job. But what I heard later is that I was doing a lot of things that others in the company had done, but I got them done. And so I got a reputation for always doing things better than the originator.
Well, and I think
getting it done.
I remember someone telling me, we need you to set more specific goals. Mm-hmm. And I said, I don't believe in goals. I believe in a roadmap, and I'll get things done as I do over time, because the goals can be a limitation. If I can see the end, that's boring and worthless. It's not going to grow anything. But if I basically get comfortable with the not knowing while daily getting things done, it's about effectiveness, because effectiveness has a bigger picture thinking. You see beyond the task. You see you see beyond the cell in the human body to see the soul, and you live that way, and that's effective. And then you have to have quality control. But when you're efficient, you can just put it on autopilot, cruise control, and set it off on its own. And, oh, look at all the stuff I'm quote unquote getting done. I'm not doing anything. I just push the on button.
Okay, so I'm going to start reading this now. We're on page 39 today, as we have been for over a year now. We've been reading from Jung's Red Book for Our Time, Searching for Soul Under Postmodern Conditions. So we sort of talked about what's postmodern today, edited by Murray Stein and Thomas Arst. And this is volume 2. There are 5 volumes of these essays. So we are on page 39 of volume 2. And so I will read. Europe's leading Lacanian, Slavoj Žižek. I can never understand this man when I hear him speaking, but fortunately we have it written out here. So Europe's leading Lacanian, Slavoj Žižek, made this point after 9/11 and spoke of the West's need to face up to the reality of darkness. Quote, the Americans' fear of safety is now experienced by its citizens as being under threat from an outside of terrorist attackers who are ruthlessly self-sacrificing and cowards, cunningly intelligent and primitive barbarians. Whenever we encounter such a purely evil outside, we should gather the courage to remember the Hegelian lesson. In this pure outside, we should recognize the distilled vision of our own essence, unquote. A century before, well, let's stop there and just talk about that much first.
I'd say 3 words, a very feudal, feudal essence that is juvenile. You're not required to participate in every conflict you're invited to.
Yeah, and everybody's anxious to get into a war. I mean, when 9/11 occurred, I remember for weeks there were cars with flags outside the car shooting down the road, and those flags are quite close still, I think. And so we are in a war. We don't know it yet as a people because it's been obfuscated and there haven't been briefings on it. But the Houthis are shooting at American ships every day and shooting at the U.S.S. Harry S. Truman every day. And they're shooting drones and missiles. And so far, American anti-aircraft or methodologies have stopped all those. But one fine day, one of those is going to get through on a capital ship in the United States. And then we're going to have, rah, let's go to war. And it'll be a war that we don't really want to fight. We shouldn't be fighting it, because the country that is our opponent is really primitive. And in that back part of the world, their psychological development is considerably behind the Western psychological development, and you can see it clearly. And the intelligentsia in those parts of the world do understand it, but the problem is it's much more raw there, and so we will have probably a major war in that part of the world.
It's a very modern approach to the rah, we're number one, because what happens is it strips history. What's the provocation? Is the bully actually the victim fighting back? What happened before that? What happened before that? What's been in the area? I mean, like Jung said, you put 2 people together, it's like 2 chemicals. There's a reaction or there's not. And if I take, NaCl, little clump of sodium chloride, and flush a toilet, throw it in the toilet and jump back away, the toilet's going to blow off the wall because of the reaction. It's so extreme. You throw it into a lake and it explodes and spins itself across. And so is it water in water, or is it sodium chloride in water? I mean, so I think we have to
So if we look at the chemistry of people, Franklin Roosevelt was unable to get the United States into World War II until Pearl Harbor. And World War II had actually started 2 years and 3 months earlier. World War II actually began in Europe on September 1st, 1939. And the U.S. was not in it, with the exception of a few people who went over and served in the Spanish Brigade or served in the Flying Tigers in China. But actual global war didn't begin until Pearl Harbor. And the reason was that Roosevelt knew he couldn't get the country behind him psychologically until something like that happened. He knew it was coming, and so he was ready to go with this big speech. But anyway, we did get, and we're living in times like that right now. So a century before Derrida and Zizek, Jung was making the same pronouncements in his Red Book. Jung wrote of the terror of the First World War, quote, "But the spirit of the depths wants the struggle to be understood as a conflict in every man's own nature," unquote. Modernity encourages us to live in the confinement of ego, said Jung, and the soul, excluded and ignored, is forced to develop an ambivalent aspect. The soul arraigns itself against us as something which thwarts our will, which is strange and even hostile to us, and which is incompatible with our conscious standpoint. The soul wants something different from the ego, and we are at war with ourselves. He claimed that, quote, "When an inner situation is not made conscious, it happens outside as fate," unquote. To what extent, then, is the scourge of terrorism and externalization of internal dynamic? Jung said, quote, "The world must perforce act out an inner conflict and be torn into opposing halves. I am not claiming any causal connection between our spiritual situation and the world crisis. In synchronicity, quote, no reciprocal causal connection can be shown to obtain between parallel events. The only recognizable and demonstrable link between them is the common meaning of equivalence," unquote.
And I think the equivalence goes back to our efficiency versus effective, where there's equal and equivalence or congruent with versus equanimity, which is harmony and balance. So equanimity would be more of a quality, whereas equivalence is just a scalar number. I mean, it's x equals x, 1 equals 1, which is, you know, the reflexive property of geometry, x equals x. It's redundant. And it's one of those, why does that even need to be said? But it is needing to be said because it's a basic building block. That really says geometrically identity. You know, so you are inside what you are outside, x equals x.
I'm going to just check and see if I have a photo that I picked up from a friend yesterday.
And this, while you're looking for that photo, this reminds me of that image I have that says it's a cylinder viewed one way with light. It's a rectangle viewed another way. It's a circle. and it says true, true, but then the whole truth is the both and of the picture. Which reminds me of Rodin's sculpture and the idea of frames. You know, every time you look at a sculpture from a different vantage point, you get a different frame, you get a different perspective.
So this picture is Frankfort, Kentucky. And yesterday, I don't know what river this is. It might be the Ohio River, but whatever the river is, the city of Frankfurt was built on one of these bends of the river. Because if you look at a alluvial river, they start to zigzag back and forth, and this is a huge example of it. And you know, these Kentuckians, well, it made sense at one point because they could use the river for transport. And so they could get from one side of town fairly easy on the river. But what they did was they built the main part of their city in the middle of a place that was going to flood. And here you go.
But it's interesting because you get the 100-year floodplain, and then you get the 500-year and 1,000-year floodplains, and they're kind of in between. Which,
yeah,
I mean, you're building something that's going to last less than 300 years.
Right. Well, you know, and so, you know, I have a colleague who, no matter what things go wrong, says, oh, well, Jesus will take care of it. He went to Liberty University. And so Jesus will take care of this. Well, you know, I'm sorry, but God made rain, and God made scientists, and scientists can now tell you what place is going to be terrible, what place isn't. And yet we want to ignore science and just go by what Christ would do. Well, God made Christ too.
Well, and the Navy SEAL version of that is no matter what happens bad, you say, good, embrace the suck. What are you going to do about it? I mean, so, you know, except that takes a proactive approach rather than the, you know, casting off to some deity is going to solve the problem, which to me is.
You know, we've had this war on science, and the problem is that science was also God-given, and yet we want to ignore it.
Well, yeah, so I think that's a good point, because the war on science comes at the cost from we've been indoctrinated to lose art for so long. And it's just jumping around hopscotch between different pieces that all are necessary in the puzzle. And now it's a very reactive bent that a lot of people have, that is perception instead of perspective. It's like, did you hear this on the news? Was it on the news, or was it on Instagram or Facebook? Or did someone say something and it just got your goat? I'm like, I walk around with a whole lot of, I don't believe you. I mean,
yeah, we have a big problem in the world with young people having cell phones too early, so they don't know how to differentiate and what's important and what isn't.
You're quoting fiction. Yeah, they're quoting fiction in a movie, you know, that happens to be in front, but it masquerades as reality, but the reality is it's just a reaction to something else that was fictional. I mean, if there's not a little quirkiness, it's not of any value. I mean, I think I said it last week, that of course truth is stranger than fiction. Fiction has to actually make sense, or you won't buy it. You won't want the book.
Yeah. So we have a new person joining us, and
welcome.
You're welcome if you want to speak. So anyway, we have to just stop ignoring science, because now we've just done away with Noah, pretty much. We've done away with all the scientists. So now the predicted climate change is going to whack us. We just won't know it's coming anymore. Good Lord.
Well,
Talk about
that
ignorance.
kind of reminds me of the pandemic. Any pandemic or climate change that needs marketing is a ploy.
Yeah.
You can look out the window and know. And we see all the floods and we see all this stuff, all the planes all of a sudden. Well, I don't think anything changed. It's just what's the media pointing the camera at. And the whole life is unsure. Life is unsafe. You have to mind your surroundings. And I just really feel that people get on the bandwagon and amplify the reactivity. And it's all crisis mongering. We don't see, in the news, 3 men helped this old lady across the street. We never see that. But, the news is 3 parts. First, you have, first you have the killings, and then you have the weather, and then you have the sport. The 4-year-old version.
Yeah. So anyway, I just had to share that picture of Frankfort, Kentucky, as of yesterday.
So it's like North Carolina version.
Yeah.
A Maui.
Yeah, they're waiting for Christ to save them. So, I think science was given to humanity to also save us, right? In theory, and a lot of people want to just ignore it. All right. So according to Sufi texts, the notion of a holy war applies more to the inner than the outer realm. The true meaning of jihad, according to Hazrat Inayat Khan, refers to the psychological strife to overcome the false ego. When returning from battle against the infidels, the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, said, "We have come back from the lesser holy war to the greater holy war." His companions asked, "What is the greater holy war?" Muhammad, peace be upon him, replied, "The war against the ego." Shahid Athar explains that in Sufi tradition, the ego is the enemy of spirit, and conquering the ego's ascendancy is the best form of jihad, allowing the Sufi to be at peace with him or herself and close to the creator. According to Thomas Cheetham, terrorists have misunderstood the symbolic nature of their quest and the call for jihad and are externalizing the battle. Wolfgang Gigerich points out that it is so much easier to resort to resentment and to blame others for the unsatisfactory conditions one finds oneself in than to engage in a long-term struggle, so much easier to act out by detonating bombs than to interiorize and integrate. It would seem that the misunderstanding of jihad is called forth by the West's refusal to engage with the sacred. The West has become the infidel by virtue of its profane existential stance. The sacred has been forced into the role of adversary, of which Derrida and Jung speak. It is significant that the dark aspect of the holy, lost to Christianity, is being picked up by postmodern philosophy and depth psychology, as if to rescue what had been suppressed. Jung said that it is impossible to imagine that religion which has meant so much to so many across millennia, could disappear without a trace, simply because secularism has seemingly taken over. He likened the religious impulse to an instinct, and like every instinct, it has its specific energy, which it does not lose even if the conscious mind ignores it. This instinct would return, like everything unconscious, with considerable force as soon as conditions allow. It would not only return with explosive power, but in distorted forms, since psychic contents take on disruptive aspects when repressed. Okay, George, you want to address that?
Yeah, I think in simple, it's a whole lot of projection nurtured by avoidance of self. Yeah, a whole lot of projection nurtured by avoidance. And that then puts it out what you've missed dealing with within. And that's efficiency. You know, you're not being effective.
Yeah.
And to Paviti, we're reading Jung's Red Book for Our Time, Searching for Soul Under Postmodern Conditions, Volume 2, edited by Murray Stein and Thomas Arst. You're welcome.
Yeah. Okay. Go ahead, Jordan. Can you read from here? My
Sure.
throat seems to be giving up.
If I battle the lisp from my teeth cleaning, my tongue keeps going up against the back of my teeth, because it's like they're so smooth. We'll see if I can play the radio show instead. Society has broadly accepted Freud's theory that sexuality returns in distorted forms, such as neurosis, hysteria, and criminality, when it is not made conscious in individuals. We have conceded this much to psychoanalysis, but Jung's theory is regarded as suspect because he is dealing with the less tangible reality of the religious impulse. If the, in quotes, great repressed was sexuality in Freud's time, it is religion in ours. Religion is the unlived life of modernity. Jung argues that religion will return with devastating consequences, just as sexuality returned with shocking impact in Freud's time. Postmodern philosophers have ignored Jung's work, but what they are saying is identical to his thought of 100 years ago. Derrida's colleague Gianni Vattimo wrote, to quote, "In spirit, something that we had thought irrevocably forgotten is made present again. A dormant trace is reawakened, a wound reopened. The repressed returns, and what we took to be an overcoming is no more than a long convalescence." Secularists imagine that spirit had died with the decline of institutional religion. Spirit for them is an obsolete idea that had been defeated by science. But as Vattimo argues, spirit was not overcome, but asleep. The, in quotes, secular turn put spirit in a state of suspended animation, and the intelligentsia thought humanity had entered a new world. But this was not the case. Spirit had been comatose, but is now returning. The modern mind has had its sport of progress and taste of freedom, and now it has to contend with the archaic realities in the soul, which cannot be accounted for by secular materialism. As early as the 1950s, Italian philosopher Romano Guardini had made this prescient remark, to quote, "Modern man sought for answers within his soul. Enigmatic powers awoke out of the religious spirit. The force of the numinous impinged itself directly upon the human spirit, either from within the spirit or from the world at large. Not only was the numinous benefit, not only was the numinous beneficent, but also bewildering, even destructive in its impact. This sense that the sacred can be a destructive force that has to tear apart the secular fabric is found in philosophy, psychology, and poetry. One of the most powerful accounts of this destructivity is found in the work of the Jewish philosopher Emmanuel Levinas in God and Philosophy, where God is imagined as an antagonist who sheds the defensive structures of the ego. Some thought Jung odd when he announced in 1929 that, in quote, the gods have become diseases. But 3 generations later, Derrida felt that the, in quote, return of the religious was welling up in the collective mind like a tsunami. Religion, said Derrida, is not something we do, but something that is done to us. It arises from a mysterious source that needs to be explored. Using the language of psychoanalysis, Derrida wrote, to quote, how can one account for this, quote, return of the religious without bringing into play some sort of logic of the unconscious? And I think that's a both and again.
Right.
So I think the question is, how can we as a society move past these dualism, polar opposites, either or, to, without shame, have both and, but do no harm?
Yeah, I think the first thing to start to think about is the fact that there aren't any opposites per se, except in very broad brushes. I mean, the opposites is a shorthand for discovering what God already made at the time of the big boom DA. There's the opposites. I mean, the male and female, for example, that was simple. Everybody could see it. But if you have one person that sees it a certain way and another person that sees it a certain way, and they're going past each other on this circle, they don't actually do that. I mean, one might be a little bit more this way and one might be a little bit more this way. And once the opposites intersect or transgress the other side, then you get all kinds of swirls and things that go on between them. It's not plain and simple. It's not like this, it's like this. And then you get another person in there. Pardon?
The swirls, little arabesques, also their turbulence or influence.
Right. And then you get another person in there who has just a little bit different perspective. And the swirls get even more complex. And when you've got 8.5 billion of us all doing that, then you have to recognize that there is no such thing as opposite, that we all, in very general terms, we can identify really big opposites. We all always are talking about gender, for example, but as we've learned in the last couple of decades, gender is, not fixed. And I think, a lot of Americans, for example, want it to be fixed. We think that by fixing gender, by fixing, I don't mean repairing, I mean solidifying it so that we know what we're talking about. The new president has declared that there are 2 genders in the world, in the United States and the world. It's simply not true. It's not true. And the sooner
I
we
think,
start to realize that, the better.
well, I think the example I give is the lie that the circle has no beginning and no end. It certainly has a beginning and an end if you're an architect, because when you start to
Mhm.
draw the circle, it's just a curved arc. And when the end touches the beginning, then it has no beginning and end because it's now identified as a circle.
Yeah,
But so I think the whole metaphor there is a process, and I think not basing things on um, things beyond someone's control. Are you a man or a woman or other? And well, what have you done with yourself? Not hiring because of a quota, hiring because of expertise or because someone's brand new and you want to help them begin the circle. And so I think what's interesting is we see a lot of, to me, the idea of drawing a circle is just like the news. If I'm the one telling you there's no beginning and no end, I'm the liar because I know when I put that compass point down that I knew where I started the compass and I knew where it ended. But once I finish, you can't see it because you have a seamless integration of the end into the beginning. So even the Ouroboros, the snake biting its tail, tells that whole story pretty clearly.
yeah,
But I think people try to see the, oh, look at the abstract, no beginning, no end. How magical. No, that's a lie. That's what it is now, but it's not what it was when it started.
yeah. So let's read the next paragraph. Secularism had not taken the unconscious into account. There was unlived life that would blow secularism to smithereens. Secularists assumed that if religion could be denounced and if science could show that its assertions were wrong, religion would disappear and never return. However, the religious urge is ineradicable, and to the degree that we repress it, the danger increases. Today, we witness the rise of fundamentalism in all the religions, Christianity, Judaism, and Islam, and in Hinduism and even Buddhism. We live in a world in which religion and violence have become permanently associated, which is a shocking irony given that the scriptures of all religions preach love and peace. But once the spirit is defiled, it emerges in distorted forms and nothing other than a change of attitude, a new reckoning or covenant will alter its destructive course. Christopher Koch wrote, the spirit doesn't die, of course, it turns into a monster. Fragments of the sacred are found in the distorted religious forms of today, and the perpetrators of terror quote passages of scripture as they fly their planes into the World Trade Center or attack railways, buses, hotels, concerts, and media outlets. This wrath is not entirely of political origin, but has its source in an archetypal disposition. That is why the war on terror can never eradicate this violence, because we are not only talking about humans carriers of evil, but a predisposition to evil in the psyche itself.
Keyword fundamentalism. People with piss poor fundamentals because they don't ever get past the they don't get past the fundamentals. It's childish. And
Yeah,
here's the thing. This is why the quote war on terror. Well, which things are actually terrorist acts? Which things mimic terrorist acts so people think they're terrorist acts? Be careful about what fuel you add to your fire, because I mean, World Trade Center is a whole big piece, and um, I'm not going to go into it, but I don't know what the insurance company pay. I'll just say that.
okay. Richard made an interesting observation. He says, If one feels a baby dragon, it only gets bigger. No?
If one
It's
feels a
only get-
dragon? Oh,
Mhm.
fuels. If one fuels a baby dragon?
No, if one feels or feeds, I'm sorry, if one feeds a baby dragon, it only gets bigger.
Dragons are pretty cool.
Yeah. Yeah, I normally have a dragon on my wrist. But I try not to feed it, especially since it's made of pewter. Um, but I do.
I think I think that that's a really it's an important comment you made, because on the surface it's the dragon is evil. Oh, there we go. Yeah, it's on the surface the dragon would be evil, but in reality, how much evil is actually evil versus how much evil is something that someone's simply ashamed of? And that's the don't rectify what's internal, and it puts it out externally. So, if I'm going out looking for yellow cars in trouble, I'll probably find yellow cars in trouble. But if I go out for a walk, I might meet a new neighbor or find a flower or a rock or something. But I'm comfortable with the not knowing. And I think the metaphor of just taking a walk, goallessly, just relax, don't have to, you don't have to show your work. You don't have to look at what I learned as if somehow your action was not valuable. To me, there's a simplicity of clearing out, change the filter, and go, 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 work, 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 and then don't go, 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 and don't work, work, work. I mean, there's a balance or equanimity rather than equality. Equanimity being harmony and balance, whereas equality just being equivalent, equal, congruent.
Okay, we have 5 pages left, so let's see if we can get through them in the time we have remaining. But it is not, huh?
You mean to read?
Yeah, that would be great.
But it is not as if terrorists are targeting only non-religious or anti-religious people. An irrational process has been unleashed and lashes out in any direction, often against other Islamic traditions. There is a disturbance in the world psyche, and it will do a great deal of damage to all civilizations. The message for us is that the religious life has become pathological. Militant Islamic groups are burdened with the task of reminding the West, which they refer to as the infidel, of the dangers of the sacred. This reality cannot be trifled with, and analyzing the post-secular condition is an urgent priority. Extremist groups, or in quotes, cells of violence, are opposed to modernization and its consequences. It is not so much the quote unquote West that these groups are opposing, but the field of modernity. Derrida reminds us that discernment is required. Islam is not Islamism, and we should never forget it. But the latter operates in the frame of the former. Militant groups operate in this name of religions, but are to be differentiated from them. A commentator says, when I use the phrase religious violence, I do not mean violence caused by religion, but violence associated with it. We are witnessing a mutant religiousness that has more to do with violence than with worship. However, the separation between Islam and terrorism can be taken too far. Some Islamic leaders deny that Islam is in any way involved in these atrocities. They claim that Islam is a peaceful religion, concerned with justice and truth. In his work defending Islam, the book The Secret of Islam, Love and Law in the Religion of Ethics, Henry Bayman writes, this drastic departure from what has been the Islamic norm for 14 centuries can only be explained by a lack or distortion, not an excess, of Islamic sensibility. He goes on to quote, suicide attacks are not just un-Islamic, They are profoundly anti-Islamic. Historically, they had no place at all in Islamic culture. Suicide bombing was invented by other parties and began to be used by so-called Muslims only during the last few decades. Its use in the Middle East is due not to a religious, but to a political dispute. Other apologists blatantly deny that terrorism is an Islamic problem and say it is instead a human problem. I take their point, but I am not convinced. I don't think plain denial is helpful. Contrary to those who make a definite division between terrorism and Islam, Wolfgang Geigerich of Berlin writes, many Islam scholars and many well-meaning people in the West warn against confusing the acts and ideology of the Islamic terrorists with Islam as such. True Islam, they claim, is a peaceful religion, and the jihad, they point out, actually was a strictly religious meaning, very different from that found in the terrorist use of the term. As justified, this caution is academically. As justified as this caution is academically, it is also irrelevant in the concrete situation we are in. What the terrorists do reflects on Islam, such. Maybe indeed not on, quote, true, authentic, original Islam as it should be understood, but certainly on real Islam. Let me do this next paragraph. Geiger confronts the political correctness of our time and its inability to face facts. Amen. To offer my critique of Islam in our time is dismantled as Islamophobia. My view is that militant Islamism is a traumatized version of Islam. This is a dark side of Islam that has to be integrated. Every religious culture has to admit to its shadow side and not bury it beneath espousals of goodness and piety. Psychiatrist Henry Cristal says trauma produces a regression, in effect, a deficit in the capacity for the symbolic representation, an increase in fantasy formation. There is a deficit of symbolic awareness and fantasy formation in the terrorists, many of whom are inspired by the idea of unreal rewards in heaven. The Ku Klux Klan does not represent Christianity. However, it cannot be fully separated from it either. It represents the evil, demonic face of this culture. The first rule of psychology is not to disavow darkness when it appears. In quotes, this thing of darkness, I acknowledge mine.
Amen.
I love that first, the political correctness of our time and its inability to face facts. People who are ashamed can't just tell the truth. I mean,
yeah,
back up 2 steps. Don't go forward and embellish. It's what actually happened, which is, to me, perspective versus superficial perception. I want to see this, so I will see that. But what is it? What is it? What is it really? I think it's important.
Yeah. Okay, Giegerich has argued that the wave of terrorist violence is not a class struggle between rich and poor, nor is it a battle between Islam and Christianity. Rather, it is a battle between a modern and a medieval mindset. The West has had a long battle with its traditional religious system, so that the natural tendency of any religion to see itself as superior to others has been fought and won. That is what makes the West modern, a long historical and philosophical critique of its religious system, in which theological hegemony was destroyed and individual rights emerged as a powerful moral force. And equivalent, and I just observed that rights are certainly being challenged now. They're not as powerful as we thought as a moral force. equivalent development did not take place in the Islamic world. The critical fight with, indeed against itself and its own orthodoxy has not taken place. As a result, we find pre-modern features like still in place, the prevalence of ancient emotions of shame and horror in a culture in which human rights are submerged. Shame and honor are more important than individual lives, which is why lives can be sacrificed so readily. The greatest sin is not to take lives, but to criticize the sanctified claims of the Islamic religious system. Can you read on, Jordan?
Sure. This was expressed in the fatwa against novelist Salman Rushdie. In 1989, the Ayatollah Khomeini issued a fatwa ordering Muslims to kill Rushdie for supposed blasphemy in the satanic verses. Khomeini's fatwa was condemned across the Western world by governments on the grounds that it isolated the rights of free speech and freedom of thought, and it violated the rights of free speech and freedom of thought. However, human rights were not accepted as a basis for justice in Iran. The issue was said to have divided Muslims from Westerners along the fault line of culture. Said the Ayatollah in 1990, even if Rushdie repents and becomes the most pious man of all time, it is incumbent on every Muslim to employ everything he has got, his life and wealth, to send him to hell. Here we have an example of the medieval and modern rubbing up against each other. The problem, in quotes, the problem behind Islamic terrorism is the conflict between two different historical stages of cultural development. It is the modern experiment that is viewed as decadent by Islam, since it has radically shaken the certainties of all religious systems. The modern has made the medieval mindset indignant and angry over the relativization of values, the annihilation of traditional structures, and the arbitrariness resulting from a free and open society. By way of defense, the medieval mindset turns against the modern and tries to destroy it. It is rage against the modern that we are witnessing, including anger at elements that make the medieval world feel insecure, such as loss of male superiority and code of honor, the decline of patriarchy, the dissolution of fixed sexual roles, and new freedoms given to women. All of this, together with the destabilization of religious authority, makes the medieval mind see modernity as decadent and perverse. What we find in the terrorist quote-unquote brotherhood is a quote masculine protest against a new world that the old world rejects.
Okay. The West has managed to suppress its own negative response to modernity's disregard of religion. Loss of religion in the West does not register as a trauma. On the contrary, Westerners have been generally keen to give it away, seeing religion as an encumbrance they can do without. According to the strict descriptive modernity, religion is a remnant of a superstitious mindset that the West has outgrown. Only when Westerners suffer personal and collective trauma, so that their egoic encapsulation is challenged, does religion appear as something important that has been lost. In this context, it is the traumatized religion of Islamism that carries the burden that the West has been unable to accept. There's a part of us that is shaken by the modern, but that is acted out on the world stage by hostile forces. As Goya put it, the sleep of reason produces monsters. In its encounter with Islamism, The West collides with its oppositional self that wants to return to the medieval worldview. Terrorists scream, Allah Akbar, God is greater, as they commit atrocities, and this can be seen as the wounded religious instinct hitting back. This instinct has turned psychotic in its terrorist form. It is hard to know how anything can be redeemed from this situation. Psychotic outbursts lead from one atrocity to another and do nothing to offer the possibility of healing or a reintegration of the sacred. Terrorists present God in a form that has to be opposed by civilization. This adds to the burden of despair and confusion faced in the West. Secularists and humanists see in Islamism the image of religion that they hate most of all. They see the impossibility of integrating a sacredness that has become hot with rage, furious with neglect, and anarchic with suppression. The rogue sacred is not assimilable by modernity, and no synthesis is on the horizon. If we are seeing this as a drama of the world's soul, the war on terror reinforces the stalemate and perpetrates the outlook that may have precipitated the crisis. Thus, we are condemned to going around in circles. And so, what will be the circuit breaker? It is easier to frame the question than to find any answer. But we know that there is more to this crisis than social or political factors. Okay, I'm going to let you.
Well, you know, who holds the strings on the marionette? Kind of reminds me of a friend of mine in college, in regards to God, said, so big and so there you can't see it. So there's what populates and pervades the whole universe, as it would be. I like this, you know, what will be the circuit breaker that shuts whatever the problem is down, exposes the short in the system electrically, because that's what pops the circuit breaker typically, is a short or an overload, so that the system doesn't catch fire. Well, like Skip is fond of saying, then there will be blood kind of thing. But here, the what is the circuit breaker? He's correct. It's easier to frame the question than to find an answer. Because even if I go into what can I not see, who's pulling the strings, well, I can't see that. Who, them, they, that person. I don't know. So I mean, the circuit breaker is a feature of a system as a safety protocol. So I think that what is the circuit breaker in the system? I don't know. But it's certainly a question worth pondering. That there's more to this crisis than social or political factors. So that to me says cross-cultural factors. Neither side in a society or a nation's politics, neither side, country versus country, culture versus country, culture versus culture. And I think as we mix, you know, the medieval times, it's the feudal versus the modern. So, you know, it's easy to get irritated when you're angsty and adolescent. and later you're just informed. For example, if I'm proven wrong on anything, I actually have joy enter, because that means it's an opportunity for me to learn something. Not that I should be ashamed that I was mistaken. And I think that's a war on the inner terror. You know, me finding out that I've been so in error on something inside, that's my war on my inner terror. So I think here, what will be the circuit breaker? I don't know the answer, but personally, I think the war on my inner terror is the only part that I can do so that I'm informed, and I don't get reactive like an angry adolescent who's irritated, where I can get angry, but I can have joy enter when I'm proven wrong, because it's an opportunity to learn instead of to enter conflict. Welcome back.
Well, I'm reminded of what Admiral Yamamoto said after Pearl Harbor. He had been a naval attaché in Washington before World War II, and after he had successfully bombed Pearl Harbor, he said, "I fear we have awakened a sleeping giant." And as I look at our current affairs, we can say the same thing. I mean, the people that are supporting our president right now had a long list of grievances, let's say, about what the development of liberalism in the West had done, and they've gotten power so that they have gotten away with destroying a lot of the things that have been done in a very short period of time. But in the process, they've awakened a sleeping giant, I think. And it's going to be very interesting to see how things play out now.
Well, you know, and I have a counterpoint to that, because it seems to me who's being the loudest is not the one in the majority. And last year, Teslas were saving the planet, and now they're being vandalized by the same people who said they were saving the planet. So I think what's interesting is I try not to associate the Tesla vandalists and that type of people, constant protest, and they're always irritated about something, with the group that they're part of. So you know, every bad apples in the group spoil the whole, you know, don't let the bad apples spoil the whole harvest, or spoil the whole group. So I think too, we're systematically trying to be led by the nose by how reactive are we still. And we have an election every 4 years. And it seems now, instead of the politicians running for 4 years to get the next election, now we have the people doing it. And it seems like both sides of the politicians are getting some things done. Now, there are bad apples in that group too. So I find the hypocrisy just glaring, that last year Teslas were saving the planet, and now they're the source of all evil. So that's just because a couple of key people migrated from one party to the other. And no, maybe they're grieving, maybe they're irritated, I don't know. But I again, if it's on the news, I'm going to look the other way, because what are they trying to get me to not see? You know, to not see. I better be careful about those two syllables together. But you know, when I don't see what they intend me to see, well, I have perspective in my life, and I see things in front of me to do, not being led around by the nose. And, you know, I'm a small fry. I mean, I'm not that important of a person. So I find if I just mind my business and do my work, then that's my war on my inner terror, you know, activated to be something hopefully beneficent in the world, or at least do no harm.
Yeah. Well, you know, I do observe that life goes on in America,
Yeah.
regardless of demonstrations.
Right.
However, people do get provoked, let's say. And so I did my demonstrating back when the powers that be stole the life savings of about 10 million families, including mine, by making conditions such that we lost our homes. And I did get up and make signs and go out and protest at that time, but I'll show you what my wife was doing yesterday. And mind you, my wife is a Buddhist. So let's see. Okay, so there's Debbie. And so here she's wearing her engaged Buddhist, okay, with a Buddhist
Move fast and
on a
break things
mat.
doesn't work for
Yeah.
moves fast and break things doesn't work for humans. Nice.
Right. Yeah. And
You know,
so
that's interesting to move fast, because that's the efficient instead of the effective. And it's interesting, like the economy right now, the stock market doing what it's doing. Well, this is the same exact thing that happened with Reagan, and then it skyrocketed. I mean, we're in a historical cycle that even the politicians, whichever ones you support, are kind of pawns. And
are kind of what? What was the last word?
Pawns, P-A-W-N-S.
Yeah.
You know, maybe go eat some prawns instead of, you know, dealing with the pawns. I like that. Move fast and break things doesn't work for humans. That's strong.
Yeah. And she had something on the other side. It was something like stop robbing the future.
Nice.
And, you know, for my part, at my age, where I'm approaching being an octogenarian, I know that I've put in more than $200,000 into the Social Security system, well over that. And yes, I am drawing money out now because I've passed the golden age. And I hope to continue to do for the rest of my life. But I can understand people's concern when they live on Social Security. And fortunately for me, I do have a full-time job right now, although I'm not sure it's going to last after 2 months from now. And this observation I'm going to have on Thursday may seal the deal one way or another. I don't know. I think the reason for the observation, though, is because the school is trying to get another special educator in our middle school, because I'm really pulled in too many directions and can't spend as much time as I should spend with each of my students. And they're quite needy. And so I think because, well, the person that's observing me is 2 levels above my boss. Um, and at least, well, 2 levels above my principal, let's say, uh, in the county system. And so I can only imagine, and the class of mine that they choose to observe is the one that's the worst, known to be the worst. Everybody knows that that
Mhm.
class is out of control. And so it's going to be a very interesting little, uh, what I guess it's the reason that the Australians call a meeting a bonfight. A good fight, a
Yeah,
bonfight is a meeting.
yeah, bon
Um,
BON, like French. Yeah.
yeah,
Well, and so
and
make sure the bonfight doesn't turn into a bonfire, you know.
yeah, I'm into that. So anyway, I mean, I said I'm only supposed to be observed once per year formally. And I already had my formal observation back in the fall when all of my students were high for the observation. And it was pretty much of a disaster. And I wouldn't be surprised it's the same kids that they're observing me with. And I wouldn't be surprised that it's going to be the same way.
Yeah,
Um,
it's quite a
and
well, it's interesting. You're right in the thick of the externalized terror, you
yeah,
know, the society avoiding parts of itself that then manifest with crippling the future. I mean, robbing the future. There's they're making sure that the youth aren't strong and discerning, which is robbing the future, as Debbie said. Because then what happens is you're robbing the potential, which you're kind of siphoning your own gas, wondering why the car won't start.
yeah, right. So, God knows what they really think the ultimate objective is. I mean, if the idea is to create a dictatorship, um, I think they haven't understood who the dictator is.
Well, yeah, I
And
mean, the whole, what's it called? Um, well, the knowledge management. What are we allowed to hear?
yeah,
Right?
and
But
you know the
and then the sleep of Goya said the sleep of reason produces monsters. That's
yeah,
too much capital R Greek reason. And honestly, people, hop on the sound bites of the Stoics these days, but they were pretty unruly, wild living. We get the Marcus Aurelius stuff, but he wasn't afraid of much. I mean, and so you get a pretty wild west in a sense living, and then you get these gems of the quotes, but they weren't all Stoic. Wasn't ascetic, and it wasn't withholding things from themselves, and it's actually not the whole Lacanian. It's all about desire. Well, the Stoics harnessed what they wanted. They like what they like. They love what they love, and they basically, I think, had transcended shame to have perspective rather than I'm going to hide all these things about myself because I'm embarrassed. Um, I love that the sleep of reason produces monsters. And I would say the sleep of reason robs the future.
yeah, it does rob the future. I guess there's one other image from yesterday that I can show. Um, this was in Helena, Montana. Um, in Helena, Montana, where they had 1,200 people come out. More power to them. And so I have to show you one more demonstration. Here you go. The feminine trumps patriarchy. is what it says on the front. And across the arms, eat the rich. Enough of that. I won't
Well,
tell you
and
who.
to me, if I see if I can.
Yeah, it's like that. I think that that's a great demonstration there. That's a great thing, because truth is like that, right?
Yeah, because the square is true and the circle is true, but the truth is the cylinder. So I mean, I think to me, that's especially these days has become my favorite image. Um, just about. It's quite a telling story. And actually, I'll counterpoint it with. Hold on one second. See if my funny version of that.
It's a sky. I'm sorry, I can't read all the colors. Oh, shady side.
Yeah, sky, sunny side of pyramid, shady side of pyramid, instead of a pie chart.
Pretty good.
And that's it to me is to take it with a grain of salt. I mean, take it with
Yeah,
a grain of salt. Try to have wits and a sense of humor. Honestly, if someone tries to insult you, just ask them, "Are you okay?"
yeah,
You, literally, careful being full of care instead of cautious. Um,
yeah.
I'll probably read this last several paragraphs.
Didn't we finish it? I
No,
finished it, or I thought you finished it.
I thought we stopped at more to this crisis than social or political factors. I was just flapping my gums while you were gone about that paragraph. So I'll finish it out. The modern cannot capitulate to a pre-modern demand that a totalitarian expression of the sacred be worshipped. We cannot bow down before the god of terrorists. Although some alienated enthusiasts are finding this an attractive proposition, Islamism presents the sacred in ways that are unassimilable by modernity. Western consciousness is faced with a great problem: how to assimilate the religious in palatable form in such a way that consciousness is transformed. Derrida insisted that the religious impulse would not be fitted neatly into existing forms, but would most likely explode them. The said return of the religious is not a simple return, for it comports, as one of its two tendencies, a radical destruction of the religious. This makes the task all the more urgent and problematic. The return of the religious will not fill church pews or run according to any evangelical plan. What has awoken in the unconscious, Derrida felt, is more archaic than anything traditional religion would recognize as religious. So there would continue to be a lack of fit between existing religious forms and atavistic urges. Secularism is too entrenched to allow, quote unquote, any simple return to religion. People will not return to traditions if it means turning away from secular freedoms, such as doubting, questioning, and dealing with a religion in a critical and open atmosphere. Only a religion that respects disbelief, atheism, and agnosticism will appeal to the West. Some will be prepared to adopt various kinds of fundamentalism, but this is not in accord with the spirit of the age, which searches for a post-secular solution. This is what makes Jung's Red Book a seminal work for our time. It recognizes that secularism has failed us and traditional religion has failed as well. Only by reaching into the spirit of the depths can we find a cosmology that will be adequate for the future. Such a cosmology will draw on ancient sources, contemporary science, and personal experience. it will only be in the crucible of experience that the future religion will be formed. What comes to mind to me is the dandelion. It's the first, one of the first flowers that opens. You keep them, and then the queen bees come out of the leaves from hibernating, and then the dandelions feed the bees, and then they go into this beautiful sphere that you pick, and and then the seeds fly.
Boom.
That's the boom, the explosion. And I think what's interesting is, like you say, there will be blood. He's saying here the experience in the crucible, so there's fire, but it's all the eternal story of transformation. And the crucible doesn't rob the future; it distills something pre-existing into something more valuable. So in a sense, there's evolution, and back to our effectiveness versus.
Well, we will have something new. The question for me personally, I mean, my wife and I only have Social Security, plus I have a small pension from the Marines, which covers my health insurance very conveniently. However, I'm relying on the government for those, all three of them. Two Social Securities and one military retirement. I'm relying on the government fulfilling its promises to me over my lifetime. And so if somehow that ends, then I have to fall back on my family. And that may not be easy.
Right.
And harder for some than others, obviously.
Well, and I think something I said, well, my sister and I were talking about the stock market last year, and she asked me if I had any emotions about it. I said, no, it's just like weather. It's going to wash through. There's no bad weather. There's just bad wardrobe. So even your question there, you're reliant on, and that's a wardrobe, but you set it up. So it works. And it has been set up, and you have set it up. So, I mean, the no bad weather, just bad wardrobe. Well, sometimes, though, you need to change the clothes, so
yeah.
I start looking at, what's count onable. And when I get down to it, not a whole lot. The only count onable is change. But I don't know, preparation breeds opportunity. What did Picasso say? Inspiration finds me when I'm working, or inspiration finds me working. And you're doing things. You're actionably participating in life, which in that sense, you're not robbing your own future. In fact, you're putting money in the savings account of the future with the youth, the young people that you're helping. Just a presence that there's a potential beneficent force. You're basically a counter to a whole lot of everything they've probably experienced.
There have been a number of interesting exchanges on YouTube, which I couldn't really get to, but there's one here that sticks out among the others, and that's Rapunzel, who says, "I'm pissed, and I'm not going to try to calm down."
Nice.
Yeah.
When pissed, be pissed. It's like very Buddhist. When hungry, eat. When thirsty, drink. When gotta pee. If you're pissed, be pissed. Don't notch down your whole flame. No need to harm anyone with it. But I when I'm pissed, first thing I look at is, well, what inside got irritated? Well,
the thing that for those who are really worried about the future, I would just say, go to the grocery store, go to the movie theater, go to the pharmacy, and look around you. Okay. We have a successful country in the United States, and I'm mainly talking about the United States, but this is true of everywhere. And unless you live in Gaza or Ukraine, um, things are going along pretty well for everybody. And, they may not be the way you want them to be, that, you may wish you had 100-foot yacht and could sail it every day, and you don't have. And, that's, but, you can live that life in your psyche. Okay.
Well,
You
yeah,
know,
and pissed and not gonna get unpissed. It's good for you. And at the same time, I would look at what's irritating you inside rather than what
yeah,
outside is just reflecting what's irritating you inside. Because I find if I'm pissed, am I just avoiding something inside? Am I irritated because I got disturbed? I got attempt to be pushed off course? Did I allow that to happen? And if so, it's my responsibility. So, I say don't waste trouble. Be pissed, but know why you're pissed. Because
and keep on keeping on.
yeah,
That's
because
that's
anger
the thing, because here's what happened in the 1920s. The 1920s was called the Roaring Twenties
right,
because politicians made decisions that made uh, everything look like it was roses. And
like the 80s. It's like,
yeah, well, or the 2000s when uh, we had mortgages given without collateral and such,
right,
where they were throwing money around. And of
credit
course,
default swaps. Yeah,
yeah. And but what happened? What happened was, after the crash of 1929, things were really, really bad for the next 3 years. Okay, people were starving to death, and in soup lines
right.
waiting for somebody to give them a handout. Um, but but then what came was sort of a golden age, and it took 20 years for the party that did that to us to get back in power. Okay. And when they got back in power, it was Ike, and Ike had been tempered um, by war,
By war.
as John Kennedy put it in his inaugural. He said, a generation tempered by war. And so everything was good until somebody decided, oh, well, let's have a gratuitous war. Let's have the Vietnam War. And
Make rank
uh,
to make rank. I mean,
yeah, they
that's
needed to
basically
make rank, and they needed to build equipment, right?
yeah,
But
and
I can,
it's war as a career fair. It's like,
yeah, that's right.
you know,
Um,
the profit of death. Um, I guess death in Texas.
yeah. So anyway, we're here now, and there have been a few periods of prosperity and a few periods of non-prosperity, I would say, over the last 60 years that I've been out there in the world, the field of dreams, doing things one way or another. Um,
You
and
know, it's like the stock market. How do you react? Some people aren't on it. Some people are. If it starts going nosediving, well, do you panic or do you wait and say, I'm going to bargain hunt when it hits this amount? And you get more. And when it goes up, then you have more. And or you can, lose your rumpus either way. But
mhm.
how do you react or do you respond? And so, I mean, I'm like, oh, should I increase the position? This just tanked. Oh,
Yeah, well, the thing is that the powers that be, these people that are mega rich,
oh yeah.
they have this all same problem we have, except that they um, have a little more flexibility.
Right.
But the point is that when our president gets his big beautiful bill through, which is going to add to the national debt, what creating more national debt does, that is what causes inflation.
Mhm.
That causes inflation um, because there's more dollars with nothing behind it. Okay,
Well,
it's a
it's
loan,
and I think
right?
a equivalent piece there is the quote unquote whales on the market, who are putting hundreds of thousands of dollars at a time on a sell or a buy. Well, am I being duped? Do I respect the buy or the sell? Should I follow, or or are they distracted me from something else I should look at? Which goes back to, it's still on my shoulders to decide how I respond, and to a bill even. I mean, things going around, and what are the rules? Um, and the carpet yankers, you know,
Right. And so the point is that the they can lend us money, but that money is cheaper in value. Okay.
right, which causes inflation.
And right, and the point is that um, if they make everybody poor, um, so they can't afford to live, then they also can't sell their products. Okay. In
Right.
other words, whether you like Tesla or not, um, if the economy is tanked and your dollars don't buy as much, there's going to be fewer Teslas sold. Leaving aside anything that the chairman of Tesla has done in the last 2 years, um, he's just not going to sell as many Teslas if there's inflation. And people blamed inflation on Joe Biden, but Joe Biden didn't create that inflation. The guy that created that inflation was Donald Trump, who um, increased the national debt by more than any other president in his first term. And
And then
that,
before him, all the way back to George Washington. I mean, we have a whole system of just tit for tat,
yeah,
forth. It just gets bigger and bigger and bigger. So there's an
yeah.
inflation, also an
So the
inflation.
point is you can't make your populace poor or they're not going to buy your products.
Right.
Right. And the idea that you're going to have tariffs that are going to cause people to start making things in the U.S. Well, yeah, maybe that'll happen, but it's going to take 40 years. Okay, it's not going to happen quickly. I mean, if I'm manufacturing Cliff Bars, let's say, and I'm currently importing them, but I want to decide to make them in the U.S. How long does it take me to make my first Cliff Bar? And how much do I have to invest in order to do that? It'd probably be a decade in order to achieve that.
That's
First
a
of
bigger
all,
that's a bigger
to
scale version.
recognize that there's a market, or that there's an arbitrage opportunity where if I make Cliff Bars, I can make more money if I make them in the US rather than overseas. And I'm not saying that's true, but you can say it of any product. Um, you can say it about pens, right? Um,
Yeah,
if you're gonna
that's a
if
bigger
you're gonna
scale
make
version.
if you're gonna make pens in in the U.S. instead of importing them from overseas. There's a lot of, first of all, there's a lot of inertia because you've been making them overseas. And so the people overseas are not going to be happy for losing the manufacturing business. And, I acknowledge that, moving toward globalization did hurt a lot of people in the Rust Belt. Absolutely. And I have been observing that for 40 years. But the idea,
you're outlining a big scale version of don't rob the future. Don't not do it. It'll take 40 years. And, a little pain now might make things better later. I mean, it's like weeding the garden. If I just sit there and slothfully watch it, the weeds will choke out the stuff I want. And honestly, weeds don't even exist. They're just flowers and plants that the gardener doesn't want to name. So I think that you've just outlined a bigger scale version of don't rob the future, but also because it's going to take 40 years doesn't mean you should just because you can. So like you said, you need to see a valuation of back, 40 years from now or 10 years from now to how much can you invest? And does the investment cripple you while you're waiting, or is the investment something you can have an acceptable risk with?
Yeah, and I mean, it's like the Treaty of Versailles. Okay, the Treaty of Versailles, the idea of it was generally, okay, let's punish the Germans for having this war, right? And so they impoverished the Germans for a decade, for the decade of the Roaring '20s, that people in Germany were starving. And so what happened? The people of Germany elected Adolf Hitler to be chancellor by the biggest margin ever until Angela Merkel. And that was in 1933. And so, yes, he did rebuild industry then, which gave him the power to have a war. But all that evolution of that took 3 decades. And so, the idea that we're going to put up a bunch of tariffs and then we're going to be able to build industry behind it. Well, yeah, maybe, depending, but it's going to take a hell of a long time, and you're going to suffer the whirlwind in the middle of that. Somebody's going to suffer.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And,
well, I think it's interesting. I mean, the downside of tariffs is that the upside is the opportunity to make American products more competitive if and only if they're of an equal or greater quality, because they'll be less expensive than, and then they can raise their prices to be competitive at the level of the foreign product. And but like you just said, is it worth the investment? And if we impose that, will there be an American commercial response to become competitive at that level? Or will there just be a vacuum and then we all have more expensive products because we don't have an American one stepping in to play?
Well, and the problem is that, okay, maybe you can put together a factory, but then you have to man it with somebody. And oh, by the way, we already don't have enough labor. So
then you're going to debt.
The inexpensive labor that we've been taking advantage of for the last 40 years is overseas. It's not here in the U.S. And we're throwing immigrants out. So I know that Tim Holmes, who had his foundry for like 40 years, very successful foundry, and I visited it, and the foundry had 12 jobs in it. Okay, people that were, melting bronze and so on, and that was all well and good, except at the time I visited about 2.5 years ago, they could only fill 5 of those jobs. And ultimately, they had to close down because they couldn't fill the jobs to do the foundry because nobody wanted those dirty jobs.
Mhm.
And so if you don't have immigrants who are metal workers who are willing to do those jobs, you're not going to have a foundry. And that's what happened to the owner of this foundry.
Well, and the other side of that is, like you said, okay, we don't have a factory, we're going to build a factory. Okay, so I'm probably leveraging or going into debt. And then does that debt eat up my profits? And I didn't really get anything except there's more money flowing in the economy and from both directions. And
Yeah.
is that itself good? Or um, how long until my factory's up and running? How long until the people I staff it with are competitively producing something that's saleable in a way that's not going to get returned as a defective? Or so I mean, there's a whole lot of where, when, how, and what, and the
Yeah.
whole two
Whole
sides to the
bunch.
equation. Yeah, a whole bunch of it. I just Your example of, okay, how much am I going to invest? I mean, then what's the acceptable risk? Because I'm not going to go to Las Vegas and put everything down hoping. There's got to be some kind of due diligence from a business planning or um, available capital for losses,
Mhm.
so that the one thing you do doesn't take the whole thing down. Um,
Well, and we do talk about shooting ourselves in the foot. Uh, okay, we've been upset with Iran for 45 years because of what happened in 1979. Okay, and so there's always been this itch to go to war with Iran, and it's looking like we probably will get that fairly soon because um, after all, that's who's behind all these attacks on the shipping in the Red Sea. Um, but the United States gave away our shoe manufacturing industry. So we can't make the combat boots that our troops would need to participate in a war. We import those.
and that those boots have chips implanted for tracking, because we
Yeah,
did
who knows? It
the
it
whole
could easily be.
have, oh, look, they're on the move.
Yeah. Yeah. So, and I hope you didn't just give a bad guy an idea, but yeah, I mean, that's the type of thing that can be
If
true.
if I came up with that idea right now, that means someone else has come up with it long before me. I'm pretty sure.
Oh, yeah, yeah, sure.
I mean,
That's, yeah. And, Netanyahu thinks that Israel is going to take over Gaza and the West Bank. Well, in the short term, yeah, maybe. But, there's a statistic here. There's something like 350 million Muslims surrounding Israel, which is a country that now has a population of something like 9 million. Okay, so, if you want to destroy Hamas, you haven't destroyed it. You probably have created a war that's going to go on for a couple more generations.
yeah, and I think do you put the water on the fire? You let the fire burn. Um, which fire is actually the one that's the problem? I mean, if I go to one of those perpetual gas fires that have been going on for decades or millennia, and I start wasting my water on it, well, I'm not doing anything to solve the problem
Yeah.
except wasting water.
So anyway, if we think of the money that we have spent, wasted on the military industrial complex. You know, the Defense Department's $800 billion a year. If that $800 billion a year were used to improve conditions in the countries that are sending us people, the people that we theoretically don't want, they wouldn't be incentivized to move to the United States. They would want to stay in their own country. But instead of that, we think we can shoot them or keep running airplanes back and forth to their countries.
Well, the disparity of what we give to other countries versus the $700 for the flood or fire or the tornado or the, I mean, 700 billion versus $700. I mean, that's an inequity. Certainly, and take care of your own. And it doesn't mean, because I think foreign policy is important for balance, harmony in the world. But what about the inner war on terror from a cultural scale perspective? You know, why are we even insulting $700? That what's that, like half their rent or their food bill for however many people they have in their family for however many days? It comes and goes and it's gone.
I really liked the answer of a Methodist minister whose church was destroyed by a tornado in Kentucky, as it would happen. And a news reporter said, well, why does God do this? And the pastor said, well, God didn't do this, but God is informing what we're going to do next, how we're going to take care of one another. Okay,
well, and I think, along those same lines, I read something similar last week. I think it was, can't remember the actor, but he said, you know, if you pray for patience, God won't give you patience. He'll give you the opportunity to be patient. You know, and so, you know, it puts the onus on us. And the laugh, Tom Waits in some interview years ago, the interviewer said, so are you an artist or a poet or an alcoholic? He said, I'm a Methodist. I'm a Methodist. So, I mean, it's like, so, but yeah, the opportunity to come together.
Yeah. Okay, so next week, we have an essay by Lionel Corbett, who's a very famous Jungian analyst who often talks about religious matters. And the title of his essay is entitled The Red Book as a Religious Text. It begins on page 53 of our book, which is Jung's Red Book for Our Time, Searching for Soul Under Postmodern Conditions, Volume 2. And so anyway, thanks for being here, Jordan. It's always good to have this conversation. Yeah. And thank you all for being here. We'll see you next week, I hope. I have to go prepare a lesson plan. So long.
Have a great weekend.